Chairman Vasey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the appropriate time, I have an amendment.
Proceed. It's the appropriate time.
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment, LC number 518/3. This is an informed consent amendment. It is very straightforward. While abortion is an abhorrent surgical procedure, it is still a surgical procedure. With that in mind, this amendment will ensure an appropriate amount of time and information for the individual obtaining the abortion in advance of the procedure. 29 states have this procedure. 29 states have this language in their statute. It is constitutional, and the time period ranges from 18 to 72 hours. I would respectfully request that something as serious as this particular procedure, which is dissimilar to all others, I would graciously request your consideration for this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Chairman. Representative Blaze Sucolli. Oh, I'm sorry. Amendment LC 000518/3 is moved by Chairman Vasey. That is seconded by Representative Ucci, Representative Ella Wilkinson, Representative O'Brien, Representative McLaughlin, Representative Price, Representative Quattrochi, Representative Place, Leader Filippi, Representative Roberts, Representative Nadone, Representative Chippendale, Representative Filella, Representative Constantino, Representative Marshall. Chairman Azanaro, I'm sorry. Now that we got it in play, Representative Blaze Sucolli.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I rise in opposition to this amendment, and I would like to draw this chamber's attention to page 2 of the bill, line 12. This section details many state laws currently on our books that are not abrogated in any way by this bill. And if you look at line 12, you'll see informed consent for abortion. We have a statute on the books already. And I'll read from that statute. Here are the required disclosures, current law. 1, you have to inform the woman that she is pregnant and inform her of her estimated gestational age of the fetus at the time of disclosure. 2, you have to explain to the woman the medical nature of an abortion, including the probable gestational age of this fetus at the time abortion is performed. 3, explain to the woman the medical and surgical procedure to be employed to perform the abortion. 4, explain to the woman all known material medical risks associated with particular abortion procedure to be employed. That goes on further as well. If in the event that a physician or his or her authorized agent determines that the disclosure of a known material risk should not be made, that risk need not be disclosed, provided the medical basis for non-disclosure is certified in writing in the patient's medical record. Finally, it provides that a physician or his authorized agent may inform the woman of any material facts or opinions or otherwise state anything with respect to disclosures required in this section in the exercise of his or her best medical judgment that is reasonably necessary to enable the woman to give her informed consent to the proposed abortion with full knowledge of its nature and consequences. We have a statute already. What does this amendment do? This amendment adds a waiting period. We don't require this for any other procedure, a waiting period. We're saying that a woman who is seeking to terminate a pregnancy has to wait 24 hours. That is adding an impediment and a burden to a constitutional right under Roe v. Wade. For that reason, I urge defeat of this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Ucci.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. Clearly, the issue before us today is an emotional one. It's a very difficult one. And in my 14 years here, I've never been at a loss for words on what to say. But I stand in support of this amendment. And first, I'd like to say this has been found to be constitutional. If you think this, we are here to look at law and to try to do the best things for our residents. In dozens of states, this has already been found to be constitutional. Getting an abortion is an emotional thing. It's an emotional decision. The reason I'm supporting this is I'm thinking of someone maybe perhaps who's been under duress, who's brought in, who maybe could utilize having those 24 hours in order to think this through properly. How many medical procedures can we just walk in and get the day you walk in? How many? We can do that here. And I understand Blaze Sucolli and what he said about having all of those things, but all those happen when you go in. This is a 24-hour period by which the person can go in and can think this too. We have an obligation under Roe v. Wade in order to look at, if you look at what the Supreme Court has said, we have an obligation to balance. One of the things is that we talk about is the health of the mother. Folks say the mental health of the mother. Then why wouldn't we want to give someone at least a proper time in a breathing period and the ability to think this through? It's one day. It's 24 hours. And I think it's not unreasonable. It's Constitution. And I urge passage. Thank you.
Representative Chippendale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly this is an extremely difficult issue for all of us in the room to deal with. I think it's important to remember that it's not unprecedented for us as legislators to establish that there are certain things required in order for an individual to even exercise their constitutional rights. Of course, the first thing that pops into my mind, stereotypically, is the 7-day wait for a firearm purchase. And we realize that wait is necessary. We've acknowledged that it's in place because we want people to cool off and go in informed. Regrettably, I have been in too many operating rooms in my life, and each time, those procedures are explained to me in great depth. Each time I'm sent home with materials to review so that I understand. Each time I have an ability to reflect on whether or not the risks outweigh the benefits of whatever surgical procedure I may be undergoing. Now, we require individuals to wait 7 days to cool off before they purchase a firearm on the basis that they may be angry and they may do something stupid. And we recognize that that's a valid application of the waiting period. How come we don't recognize that it's valid to wait when we're undergoing a walk-in procedure that stops a beating heart? I can't get my head around that personally. I really can't. So I ask my colleagues to reflect on not just the work of this body, but the work of legislatures and Congress across the country who have seen value in waiting periods, who have seen the material benefit of waiting periods being in place. This is not a heavy lift. If we can't see this as a simple improvement to allow a more educated decision to be made about what could be the most life-altering experience a woman endures, then are we really focusing on the health of that individual? Or are we just trying to ensure that it can be a slam bam, thank you ma'am, done, and nobody can think about it? I don't think that's the right way to go, and I urge you to support this amendment. Thank you.
Chairman Vasey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. Representative Ucci did mention a few things I was going to mention, but I also recognize the gravity of the issue before us, the emotional involvement of those of us here today who are going to either support this law, not support this law, support the amendment or not support the amendment. But with regard to the amendment before us, Besides the fact that it is a constitutional amendment, what we have before us is in a surgical procedure, the effect of which is dissimilar to any other. This is not the removal of an appendix. This is not the removal of tonsils. And I'll get into this in depth later on, but we're talking about, if not an actual life, but a potential life. So either way, you are terminating a potential life or an actual life. I think that 24 hours is a sufficient amount of time with regard to informed consent for this type of procedure. I would ask you to consider passing this amendment.
Chairwoman Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition of this amendment for the following reasons. First, what my colleague, Representative Blaze, eloquently explained. But in addition to what Representative comment he made as part of his justification of supporting this amendment. Just understand that a woman, once realized that she is pregnant, has had more than 24 hours to make the decision of what she's going to do. So her going and making that step to go into the facility and take care of her private business, there is already much thought that has gone into this before she signed on the dotted line. You all don't know the anguish that that woman may have been going through or is going through. To force her to go through an additional 24 hours, you don't know what her situation is. The other reason, Representative Chippendale, talk about a revolver, gun, firearm, 7 days. Again, a cooling off period? Honey, I may be all that and a bag of chip and a Coca-Cola, but I am not to be compared to a firearm. A woman should not be compared. That's not a good comparison. That cooling off period for that firearm is warranted. 7 days is not enough, if you ask me. Doc, you say this is an emotional issue, and I love you dearly. But even before I came to see you to direct me about my health, I thought about it. But as soon as you told me, I went right to you because I trusted what you said and I made my own decision to do so. So it wasn't an emotional one. It doesn't compare with an appendix or tonsil. Because if my physician told me, gotta go, you're going in, I already called, and the bed is waiting, and we're ready for you, I'm going. He's not gonna say, well, you know, you need to wait 24 hours because, you know, I gotta take a break and there's someone else in line. You gotta go, you gotta go, you gotta go. It's not about 24, 48, it's about now. Because I've had the time to think about this. I have had the time to see, analyze my issue and my concerns, my plight, mine. Understand and respect that this is not a decision that happens from one day to another. This amendment is only going to make things harder for a woman because she has already thought about it and she already decided on it. So I asked you to not only listen to me today, but hear me as a woman telling you like it is. Thank you. Defeat it.
Representative McLaughlin.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Hello?
ladies and gentlemen, I'm looking on this amendment, I'm saying to myself, we've heard about the woman's decision, okay, to have an abortion, and the 24-hour waiting period, which Doc is asking, okay, who are we to decide who's going to live and who's going to die? Today, who are we? All right, I look and I say, how about the decision of that unborn infant that's in the womb, okay, that doesn't know what's coming, what's going to hit him? And I don't want to hear you talk about procedures because it's death and destruction, period. All right, so even on a procedure that I have or a woman has or anybody has, okay, they take tests. My wife just went through it. She had a valve in her heart replaced, okay? It took, a lot of expectation, a lot of basically thought process and medical process to make the right decision. All right, all we're asking for is 24 hours, okay? That little infant has got less than a minute before his heart stops beating. So I ask you, please support this amendment. Thank you.
Representative Kazarian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I rise in strong opposition to this amendment, and I rise in opposition for two reasons. First, and most importantly, for anybody who has ever had a family member or a friend who has had to undergo this procedure clearly understands that this is not a callous decision. This is a decision that we as women think through. We understand what we're going through, and to put a 24-hour waiting period in front of us is quite frankly insulting. The second part of this, the second reason I oppose this, is let's think about what this waiting period would actually do. What it would take for a woman to come to this decision, to get transportation, to get her procedure done, to get there, take time out of work. It's a medical procedure. Think about what you go through when you have to have a medical procedure done. This would just put double burden on a woman that would have to, already made this decision, that would have to go and get this procedure done. She'd have to go to the clinic. She'd have to also come back the next day. It is putting undue burden on a person that has already made this decision with not a light heart, I can assure you. So ladies and gentlemen of the House, I ask that you think about those two reasons, and I ask that you vote down this amendment. Thank you.
Representative Price.
Thank you, Speaker. I realize this is a very troubling subject for a lot of people, but just speaking on the amendment, I understand that I'll never go through this as far as being a woman, and I never understand it as a woman, but I can understand as a human that, sometimes when you're in a difficult situation and you're presented with a lot of decisions to make, like that consent form that's being presented to somebody, they have to read through the consent form, realize, go through what the procedure might be. So sometimes if you have time to think about it, kind of like we do in committee hearings, we all go through go through the pros and cons of it, run it through our minds, and run it past our colleagues, and run it past our parents and our family members to come up with a decision. So could afford someone the opportunity with 24 hours, sometimes it might not be a good 24 hours, sometimes it might be a great 24 hours, but it's only 24 hours. So I think that it's a small time period to let someone reflect on and rationalize and go through the paperwork that's being presented to them, and give them time to adjust their decision or continue on with their decision. So I would ask that everybody vote for this amendment. Thank you.
Representative McEntee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to this amendment. And I agree with both of my sisters that testified just now, Chairwoman Williams and Representative Kazarian. The decision to have an abortion by any woman is an agonizing one. It is not taken lightly. You underestimate the women of Rhode Island. When you walk into a clinic that performs abortions, first you have to call, you make the appointment. You get in there, they take down all your information. The informed consent form is right there in front of you. You have to go for counseling, whether or not you know all your options. This is not a 5-minute deal, walk in, drive home, and go to dinner. This is a full barrage of counseling. You have to sign all sorts of informed consents, and you have on here the name of the physician who will perform the abortion. I don't know how many of you in this room have had children, and I know most of you have, and we go 9 months to the same obstetrician, and who shows up at the delivery? Somebody else you never met before. So, I mean, this is, that's pretty tough to do. You're asking too much, and the woman who makes this decision is clear in her mind what she's going to do. She's had many times a week, 2 weeks to think about it, and it's a heartbreaking decision. Have faith in the women. We know what we're doing. It's our bodies. It's our choice. 24 hours is too much. I mean, why continue? Why make the woman go through one more sleepless night? Think about this. I am in strong opposition to this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Quattrochi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this amendment, and I think it would probably be a good time to share a personal story to kind of display how I think that this could help. And if you don't mind, this is a personal social media post that I posted, so I would like to read it so I don't miss anything. So I would like to tell the story of why I am unapologetically pro-life, which was not always the case as a younger man. 25 years ago, a good friend of mine got his girlfriend pregnant, his young girlfriend. Through his own selfishness and fear, he tried as hard as he could to talk her into having an abortion. Luckily, she chose to have the child, a beautiful baby girl who immediately melted his heart. The child was so loved by both parents. Sadly, Mom fell into substance dependencies, leaving my friend to raise their child as a single dad. I witnessed the most beautiful relationship between father and daughter that transformed him from a selfish, carefree young man into a selfless, responsible father who would give his own life for his child. He forgave himself and his thoughts as a foolish He forgave himself for his thoughts as a foolish young man and apologized to his daughter when she was old enough to understand. He became a soccer coach, a PTA member, a volunteer for so many school activities, and all of the rest of what goes into good parenting. He instilled honesty, integrity, kindness, and work ethic into her. And she recently graduated from college after 6 years of working her own way through with multiple jobs and many overnight shifts working with the developmentally disabled. He is incredibly proud and thanks God every day that his young girlfriend 25 years ago did not go along with his pressure to abort. I see my good friend every day as I wash my face and brush my teeth in my mirror. I'm not judging or criticizing others for their decisions in life. We all have our crosses to bear. I just wanted to share my story. My daughter being allowed to live allowed me to live, allowed me to love, learn responsibility and patience, and so much more. So I think that it's a small thing to do to support this amendment. Thank you.
Representative Kazar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to this amendment. Sorry, Pat. Little issue with the cords. Sorry. So I would like to echo what Rep. McEntee, Rep. Kazarian, and Rep. Williams have said, Chairwoman Williams have said. So first of all, we need to trust women to know their bodies and to make their own medical decisions. In the state of Rhode Island, even though right now there is safe legal access to abortion, it is neither affordable nor conveniently located for the women who have decided to make this medical choice for themselves. For an individual who may be a single parent with 2 children living on Block Island, the idea of a 24-hour waiting period is simply completely too much. What we would be asking of her is to find childcare for her children on Block Island, to manage transportation all the way to Providence, and then also to come up with the funding for the procedure, and then to return. So what we would also be asking and adding to her life is another trip for that. We are lucky to be a small state, but in the life of an individual, it's completely burdensome. For those who don't understand, 75% of the women who have received abortions in recent years are low or low income or considered poor. 60% of the women who have sought procedures already have children. They're already mothers. They understand what parenthood is about. We're not talking about people who have no thought of what they're getting themselves into. I completely reject the notion that a woman needs 24 hours to cool off. I second what my colleague has said previously. Women have thought about it from the moment they realize that their bodies have changed and have become pregnant. I think it is completely disrespectful of women, and I think it violates women's freedom of self-determination to require this. I strongly oppose this amendment.
Representative Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I rise in opposition to the amendment. I think Rep. Kassar pointed out a lot of the problematic things. It's like the government, we can't legislate for every single factual scenario that's going to come up in the doctor-patient relationship. And we need to let doctors do their job, right? And, you know, I'm speaking as a lawyer, and we have, you know, it's one of the other professions, but we have, when we do things with our clients, we have to do it with their informed consent. And no one tells me how to do it, and I take my time and I make sure that the client understands, you know, whether we're going to trial or we're doing whatever we're going to do. And I trust doctors to do the same thing, and I trust them to manage that particular relationship. So to impose a 24-hour period that basically says, whoa, you can talk to your doctor all you want, but then you have to go home and think about it. It invades that doctor-patient relationship in a way that, you know, is inappropriate. I think it's more than anything else, these waiting period bills are exactly what they seem to be, which is a burden. It's a burden. It's an unnecessary obstacle in someone's decision to obtain this type of medical care. And with that in mind, I would ask you to oppose the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Ella Wilkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this amendment. And with all due respect to my colleagues who are talking about the anguish and the maturity that a grown woman goes through in making this type of a decision, I recognize that to be true, but you can achieve pregnancy once you achieve puberty. So the fact of the matter is that we have teenage females who are easy enough that they can find themselves in a situation where they also become pregnant. And what this bill will do is give them the opportunity to hear from a professional in terms of what is going to happen, and then give them that 24 hours to perhaps go to their parents and seek some advice, as opposed to moving from fear. So please understand that while we show respect to the women here who are thinking about it every day, A teenager processing this type of information is going to process it significantly different than a mature woman who has, you know, other experiences, life experiences, to help her come to this conclusion, however heart-wrenching as it may be. Ladies and gentlemen, please support this amendment, and remember that it protects all females, not just older women who become pregnant and come to the conclusion that they have to terminate by abortion. Thank you.
Representative Carson.
Thank you, Speaker. I rise in opposition to this amendment, and I want to thank our colleague, Representative McEntee, for her comments, because I do think that if we put ourselves, myself more significantly, into the minds of a woman that has made the decision to do this, went to the facility for the procedure, I got to believe that that's a really hard thing to do. And to be told, wait, you know, go home, sleep on it, and wait 24 hours, I agree that that's an additional burden on women. I think that if we make that decision, we understand the consequences, we're informed of the consequences, then we should be able to execute our choice at that time. So I'm in opposition to this, and I encourage you to think about it as well.
Representative McLaughlin. Representative McLaughlin. Representative McLaughlin, every time you speak, Representative Tansey light comes on, you got to flip your mics around. Proceed. Nope, you're good now. You're good now. Proceed.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Yes,
Proceed.
and I would ask the representatives in this House to support Doc's amendment. You know, I look and I say, we give animals, okay, animals, 30 days, okay, before they're euthanized, sometimes 90 days. Once again, I refer to the unborn baby that's in that womb, okay? They go in, they call it a procedure. I call it murder, okay? That's my choice, all right? This baby doesn't know what hit him, okay? I ask you to give this baby at least 24 hours. Thank you so much.
Representative Alzate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand up in opposition to this amendment. Waiting 24 hours is not going to change our mind. By the time that we as women find out we are pregnant, we've had plenty of time to think about our options, and we already know what it is that we are choosing to do. When women make any decision, it is not a decision made lightly. We have especially something like this. This is a decision that we have thought about. By the time that we have made these appointments, we have had plenty of time to find a way to pay for this. So this is not something that many of us have money in our bank accounts to just put towards this. This takes time, this takes money, something that a lot of our low-income brothers and sisters do not have. So I stand in opposition of this amendment, and I ask all of you to please trust women and not supporting this amendment. Thank you.
Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to go back to my colleague, Rep. Fellow Wilkinson's comment about minors. If y'all turn to page 9 on the bill that we are on in section 23-4, it already addresses that issue for consent of parents when minors are getting abortions. So there would really be no need for a 24-hour waiting period. Additionally, I can't think of a single medical procedure that men have done that requires a 24-hour waiting period. You don't need a 24-hour waiting period for your vasectomies. You don't need a 24-hour waiting period for your Viagra. You don't need a 24-hour waiting period to have your tooth removed, and that's not ever going to come back either. I think it's very deeply disrespectful to suggest that us women with our tiny little woman brains need all the extra time that we can possibly have in order to make the appropriate decision. Pregnancy is a very personal thing. There's a reason that this bill is called the Reproductive Privacy Act, and that's because it's not your business. It's our business. It's our private business. It is between us and our doctors. It is not between us and 75 individuals in a room. It is not between us and our significant others. It is between us and our medical professionals. Once again, there's a reason this is called the Reproductive Privacy Act. It's because in every other aspects of our lives, we deserve to have the same level of privacy that our male counterparts get automatically. So I rise in opposition of this amendment. Additionally, because as an individual who worked a really low-income job, I was a waitress for a decade. When we in our infinite wisdom gave sick days, my former place of employment would have been excluded because we were less than 50 individuals. So in order for me personally to be able to have this work, I would have to take out an unpaid day of work to go to the clinic, then another unpaid day of work to go back to the clinic, then 2 more unpaid days of work in order to recover from the procedure. Once again, it's not your business, it's our business. That's why it's called the Privacy Act. This amendment represents an undue burden on all women in Rhode Island, particularly those who are low income. Thank you.
Chairman Corvese.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think this is my last time to speak.
Proceed.
With regard to Representative Walsh's comments, I think she's kind of missed the point. It's not a question of the fact that the woman is having the baby. If men had the anatomy and the function to have a child, I would be putting this amendment in for 24 hours. With regard to Representative Williams, who you know I have a great deal of respect for, and throughout this, throughout the days and weeks of this issue, you and I have had a number of conversations, very respectful, and we understand each other. We understand the multifaceted complexities of this issue. I do want to say that when you speak and any other woman speaks, I do not only hear, but I do listen. And I also listen when I'm sitting in judiciary or any other committee regarding the different type of socioeconomic difficulties and problems both men and women have. And I think Representative Vella Wilkinson and Representative Ucci touched upon the fact that the social situations surrounding a woman making a decision, having an abortion, we cannot graph out or list all the myriad potential social situations that may be affecting the woman's decision. It's not always cut and dry, and I'm sure it's not, and it's not an easy decision, but we also don't know that there may be outside elements of influence and duress. And I think that for that reason and that reason alone, because this is constitutional in other states, because this is not the removal of an appendix or the removal of a set of tonsils, that it is more than reasonable to have this amendment tacked onto this bill. It has nothing to do with disrespect. It has everything to do with respecting the situation.
There are no other lights on the amendment. Clerk, unlock the machine. All in favor, please vote green. Those opposed, red. Clerk, lock the machine. 29 in favor, 43 opposed. The amendment fails.